I stepped into our dimly lit living room, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor. The silence was deafening. "Paul?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty house. No response. I glanced at my watch. 9:30 p.m. Where was he? I sighed, dropping my bag on the couch and heading to the kitchen. Another late night at the clinic, another missed dinner. As I opened the fridge, my eyes landed on a sticky note. "Working late, don't wait up, P." My shoulders slumped. I grabbed a yogurt and leaned against the counter, my mind racing. This wasn't like Paul. He'd always been my rock, my constant support through the long hours and stress of building my counseling center. But lately, the doorbell jolted me from my thoughts. I frowned, padding to the front door. Who could it be at this hour? I opened the door to find my best friend, Sarah, standing there with a bottle of wine and a sympathetic smile. "Happy anniversary, Laura," she said softly. My heart sank. Our anniversary. How could I have forgotten? "Oh, Sarah," I mumbled, stepping aside to let her in. I completely lost track of the date. She followed me to the kitchen, her brow furrowed. "Don't tell me Paul forgot too," I gestured to the empty house. "He's working late, apparently." Sarah's eyes widened. "Paul? Mr. Romance himself? That doesn't sound like him at all." I nodded, grabbing 2 wine glasses from the cabinet. "I know. He's been different lately, distracted. I can't quite put my finger on it." As Sarah poured the wine, I found myself spilling everything. The long hours at work, Paul's sudden disinterest in our usual routines, the growing distance between us. "Have you talked to him about it?" Sarah asked, sipping her wine. I shook my head. "I've tried, but he just brushes it off. Says everything's fine." Sarah reached across the counter, squeezing my hand. "Laura, honey, you're a psychologist. You know better than anyone that communication is key." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I know, it's just, I never thought I'd be in this position. Paul and I have always been so solid." Just then, we heard the front door open. Paul's voice called out, "Laura, you home?" Sarah and I exchanged glances. She quickly gathered her things, giving me a quick hug. "Call me tomorrow," she whispered before slipping out the back door. I took a deep breath, steeling myself as Paul entered the kitchen. He looked tired, his tie loosened and hair disheveled. "Hey," he said, barely meeting my eyes as he headed for the fridge. "Hey, yourself?" I replied, watching him closely. "Long day at work?" He nodded, grabbing a beer. "Yeah, you know how it is." I cleared my throat. "Do you know what day it is, Paul?" He paused, beer halfway to his lips. I saw the moment realization dawned in his eyes. "Oh God, Laura, I'm so sorry. I completely forgot." I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. "You've never forgotten before." Paul set down his beer, moving towards me. I know. Things have just been so hectic lately. I'll make it up to you, I promise." As he wrapped his arms around me, I wanted to melt into his embrace like I always had, but something held me back. A nagging feeling that there was more to this than simple forgetfulness. I pulled away, looking into his eyes. "Paul, what's going on? And don't tell me it's nothing. I know you better than that." He hesitated, and in that moment I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt? Fear? Before I could decipher it, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at me. "I'm sorry. I have to take this," he said, already stepping away. "We'll talk later, okay?" As he hurried out of the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, I felt a chill run down my spine. Something was very wrong, and I was determined to find out what it was. The next morning, I woke to an empty bed. Paul had left early, again. I sighed, rubbing my temples as I made my way to the kitchen. The house was a mess. Dishes piled in the sink, laundry overflowing. This wasn't like us. This wasn't like Paul. As I started the coffee maker, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "How'd it go last night?" I typed back, "Not great. Paul came home late, forgot our anniversary. Something's off." Her response was immediate. "Want me to come over after work?" "Please," I replied, grateful for her support. The day at the clinic dragged on. Between sessions, I found myself distracted, my mind wandering to Paul's strange behavior. By the time Sarah arrived that evening, I was a bundle of nerves. "All right, spill," she said, settling onto the couch. "What's really going on?" I took a deep breath. "It's not just the anniversary, Sarah. Paul's been different, distant. He's never home, always working late. And when he is here, he's glued to his phone." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "You don't think he's cheating?" I finished. "I don't know. I never thought he would, but..." Have you looked for any evidence? She asked gently. I shook my head. I haven't wanted to, but maybe I should. With Sarah's encouragement, I began searching the house. We combed through drawers, checked his laptop, even looked under the mattress. Nothing seemed out of place until I opened his closet. Laura, Sarah called, holding up a stack of glossy catalogs. Look at these. I flipped through them, my confusion growing. Rolex watches, designer suits, luxury cars. None of these were things Paul had ever shown interest in before. This doesn't make sense, I muttered. Paul's always been so practical. Why would he suddenly be interested in all this stuff? Sarah shrugged. Maybe he's going through a midlife crisis? Before I could respond, we heard the front door open. Paul's voice called out, Laura? You home? Sarah quickly helped me shove everything back in the closet. I'll slip out the back, she whispered. Call me later. I met Paul in the living room, my heart racing. He looked tired, his shirt wrinkled and hair unkempt. Hey, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. How was work? He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. Fine. Busy. Listen, I've got to make a call. Can you handle dinner tonight? I felt a surge of frustration. Paul, I've been handling dinner every night for weeks now, and the laundry, and the cleaning. What's going on with you? He finally looked at me, his expression a mix of guilt and irritation. I'm sorry, okay? Work's just been crazy lately. I'll try to do better. As he turned to leave, a catalog fell from his briefcase. I snatched it up before he could react. Luxury watches, Paul? Since when are you interested in this stuff? He grabbed the catalog from my hands, his face flushing. It's nothing, just window shopping. Window shopping? I echoed incredulously. Paul, you hate shopping. You've worn the same watch for 10 years. What's really going on? For a moment I thought he might confess, but then his phone buzzed and that familiar, distant look returned to his eyes. I've got to take this, he muttered, already walking away. We'll talk later, okay? As he disappeared into his study, I stood there feeling lost in my own home. The man I thought I knew better than anyone was becoming a stranger before my eyes. I picked up my phone, my fingers hovering over Sarah's number, but instead I found myself opening our joint bank account app. If Paul wasn't going to give me answers, maybe our financial records would. As the app loaded, my heart pounded. Whatever I was about to discover, I had a feeling our lives would never be the same. I stared at the bank statement, my hands shaking. The numbers didn't lie. Thousands of dollars. Gone. Transactions at high-end stores, restaurants I'd never heard of, even a jewelry shop. My stomach churned as I scrolled through page after page of extravagant spending. Laura? Paul's voice startled me. I quickly locked my phone, shoving it under a cushion. He stood in the doorway, looking wary. Everything okay? I forced a smile. Fine, just tired. He nodded, not quite meeting my eyes. I'm heading out, don't wait up. As the front door closed behind him, I felt something inside me snap. Enough was enough. I grabbed my phone and dialed Sarah. I need you to come over. Now. An hour later, Sarah and I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by bank statements and receipts. I can't believe this, Sarah muttered, shaking her head. Laura, he spent almost all your savings. I nodded, numb. I know. And look at this. I pointed to a recurring charge. He's been renting a storage unit. Why would he need that? Sarah's eyes widened. You don't think? I don't know what to think anymore, I said, my voice cracking. The Paul I knew would never do this. Sarah reached across the table, squeezing my hand. You need to confront him, Laura. Tonight. I nodded, steeling myself. You're right. No more excuses. When Paul finally came home well past midnight, I was waiting. The statements were spread out on the coffee table, a silent accusation. What's all this? He asked, his voice tight. I met his gaze, unflinching. You tell me, Paul, where's our money going? He paled, then anger flashed across his face. You went through our bank statements? That's an invasion of privacy. I laughed bitterly. Privacy? We're married, Paul? Or have you forgotten that too? He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. It's not what you think. I can explain. Then explain, I said, my voice cold. Explain the watches, the suits, the storage unit. Explain why you're throwing away everything we've worked for. Paul's shoulders slumped. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I married. I got in over my head. There's this group at work. They're all into luxury goods, so exclusive clubs. I just wanted to fit in. I shook my head, disbelieving. Fit in? Paul, you've spent our entire savings. How could you be so selfish? His face hardened. Selfish? I've supported you for years while you built your practice. Maybe I wanted something for myself for once. His words hit me like a slap. Supported me? I've been working 60-hour weeks to keep us afloat while you've been out playing dress-up. Paul grabbed his keys. I can't deal with this right now. I'm leaving. As he stormed out, I called after him. If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back. The slam of the door was his only response. I sank onto the couch, my anger giving way to exhaustion. Sarah, who had been quietly watching from the kitchen, came and sat beside me. What are you going to do? She asked softly. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. I'm going to that storage unit. I need to see what he's been hiding. Sarah nodded, a fierce look in her eyes. I'll drive. As we headed out into the night, I felt a mix of dread and determination. Whatever I found in that storage unit, I knew it would change everything. But I was done being in the dark. It was time to face the truth, no matter how painful. Ready? Sarah asked as we pulled up to the storage facility. I nodded, my jaw set. Ready. As I stepped out of the car, I felt like I was walking into battle. But this time, I was fighting for myself. The storage unit door creaked open, revealing a treasure trove of luxury items. Designer suits hung neatly in garment bags, rows of gleaming watches lined velvet-covered shelves, and stacks of shoeboxes filled one corner. The sight made my stomach churn. Oh, Laura, Sarah whispered, her eyes wide. This is worse than we thought. I nodded, unable to speak. My hands trembled as I reached for a nearby shoebox. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a pair of Italian leather shoes. The price tag still attached made me gasp. $3,000. He spent $3,000 on shoes? I muttered, disbelief coloring my voice. As we dug deeper, the extent of Paul's obsession became clear. Receipts scattered throughout the unit told a damning story. Tens of thousands of dollars spent on frivolous luxuries. I can't believe this, I said, sinking to the floor. All our savings, our future, gone. Sarah sat beside me, her arm around my shoulders. What are you going to do? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Paul's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Where are you? His voice was tight with anger. I came home and you were gone. I'm at your storage unit, I replied coldly. Care to explain all this? There was a long pause. Then I'm coming over, don't touch anything. I hung up without responding. Sarah looked at me, concern etched on her face. Do you want me to stay? I shook my head. No, I need to face this alone. But could you wait nearby, just in case? 20 minutes later, Paul's car screeched into the parking lot. He stormed up to the unit, his face a mask of fury. How dare you invade my privacy like this, he shouted. I stood my ground. Privacy? You mean your secret life of luxury while I worked myself to the bone? Paul's anger deflated slightly. He ran a hand through his hair, looking around at the evidence of his spending spree. You don't understand. This is an investment, I laughed bitterly. An investment in what, Paul? Your ego? In us, he shouted. I did this for us. To fit in with the right crowd, to make connections that could benefit both of us. I shook my head, disbelief washing over me. You really believe that, don't you? You've thrown away everything we've worked for, and you think it's justified? Paul's face hardened. I won't apologize for wanting more out of life. Maybe if you weren't so focused on your precious clinic, you'd understand. His words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, hurt and anger warring within me. My clinic? The one that's been keeping us afloat while you played dress-up? I never asked you to work so hard, Paul shouted. I was fine with our life before, but you just had to prove something to the world, didn't you? I stared at him, suddenly seeing our entire relationship in a new light. You resent me, I said softly. You resent my success. Paul's silence was all the confirmation I needed. In that moment, something inside me hardened. I straightened my spine, meeting Paul's gaze with steely determination. I want you out of the house by tomorrow, I said, my voice steady. I'll be contacting a divorce lawyer in the morning. Paul's eyes widened. Laura, wait. We can work this out. I'll sell everything, I promise. I shook my head. It's too late, Paul. The trust is gone. As I turned to leave, Paul grabbed my arm. You can't do this. Half of this is mine. You have no right. I wrenched my arm free. Watch me. Stepping out into the cool night air, I felt a strange mix of pain and liberation. Sarah was waiting by her car, concern etched on her face. Are you okay? She asked. I took a deep breath, my mind racing with plans. No, I replied honestly, but I will be. As we drove away, leaving Paul and his mountain of luxury goods behind, I made a silent vow. I would reclaim my life, my finances, and my self-respect. And I would make damn sure Paul understood the consequences of his actions. The battle was just beginning, but for the first time in months I felt ready to fight. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. My first call was to Janet, a ruthless divorce attorney I'd met at a networking event. She agreed to see me immediately. "You've made the right choice, Laura," Janet said, her voice steely as she reviewed the financial documents I'd brought. "We'll file for divorce on grounds of financial misconduct. I'll have a restraining order drawn up to keep Paul away from your assets." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "What about the house, our joint accounts?" Janet's eyes gleamed. "Leave that to me. By the end of the day, Paul won't have access to a dime." As I left Janet's office, a text from Sarah pinged. "Paul's been calling nonstop. What should I tell him?" I typed back, "Nothing. I'm handling it." My next stop was the bank. With Janet's paperwork in hand, I closed our joint accounts and opened new ones in my name only. The teller's eyes widened as she processed the transactions, but I kept my face impassive. Back home, I started packing. Each of Paul's possessions I touched fueled my anger and resolve. His favorite sweater, the watch I'd given him for our first anniversary, the photos of us smiling on vacation, all of it went into boxes destined for his parents' house. As I worked, my phone buzzed incessantly. Paul's calls, his parents' worried messages, even a few concerned texts from mutual friends. I ignored them all. By late afternoon, the house was transformed. Paul's presence had been erased, leaving only my belongings and the bare essentials. I'd arranged for a moving company to come the next day. Tonight would be my last night in this house, our house. As twilight fell, I allowed myself a moment of grief. Collapsing onto the couch, I let the tears flow freely for the first time since discovering Paul's betrayal. I mourned for the life we'd built, the dreams we'd shared, the future I thought we'd have. But as quickly as it came, the grief passed, replaced by a steely determination. I was Laura Mendez, a successful psychologist who'd built her practice from the ground up. I didn't need Paul or his misguided attempts at status. Just as I'd composed myself, a frantic knocking echoed through the house. Paul's voice, tinged with panic, called out, "Laura, open the door! What have you done?" I approached the door cautiously, my heart racing. Through the peephole, I could see Paul, disheveled and wild-eyed. "Laura, please," he begged. "I can't access any of our accounts. The credit cards are maxed out. What's going on?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "It's over, Paul," I called through the door. "I've filed for divorce. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." His fist pounded against the wood. "You can't do this. Half of everything is mine." "Not anymore," I replied, my voice stronger than I felt. "You gambled it all away on your little luxury addiction. There's nothing left for you here." Paul's voice broke. "Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do?" For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. But then I remembered the months of lies, the drained bank accounts, the shattered trust. "That's not my problem anymore," I said firmly. "Goodbye, Paul." As his pleas faded, replaced by the sound of retreating footsteps, I leaned against the door, exhausted but resolute. My phone buzzed again, a text from Janet confirming that all the legal paperwork was in order. I looked around at the half-empty house, feeling a strange mix of loss and liberation. Tomorrow, I'd move into my new apartment, start my new life. But tonight, I'd allow myself one last evening in the home I'd loved, saying goodbye to the life I'd thought I'd have. As I settled onto the couch with a glass of wine, my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. My finger hovered over the decline button, but something made me pause. Whatever this call was, whatever new challenge it might bring, I was ready to face it head-on. Taking a deep breath, I answered the call, stepping into the next chapter of my life with courage and determination. I smoothed my blouse, taking a deep breath as I prepared for my first client of the day. It had been 2 weeks since I'd moved out, and I was slowly adjusting to my new life. The clinic had become my sanctuary, a place where I could focus on helping others and forget my own troubles. The receptionist's voice crackled over the intercom. "Dr. Mendez, your 9 o'clock is here." "Send them in," I replied, straightening the papers on my desk. The door opened, and my heart stopped. Paul stood there, flanked by his parents, looking haggard and desperate. "What are you doing here?" I hissed, standing up. "This is my workplace." Paul's mother stepped forward, her eyes pleading. "Laura, please, we need to talk." I glanced at my watch, then at the waiting room beyond. "I have clients scheduled all day. This is completely inappropriate. Please," Paul's father interjected, "just give us 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I nodded, gesturing for them to sit. Paul remained standing, his eyes fixed on me. "Laura," he began, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I know I messed up, but please, give me another chance." I felt a surge of anger. Another chance? Paul, you drained our savings, lied to me for months, and then had the audacity to blame me for your actions. What could you possibly say to make that right? Paul's mother leaned forward. "Laura, we had no idea what was happening. We're horrified by Paul's behavior. But surely there must be a way to work this out." I shook my head, my resolve strengthening. There's nothing to work out. Paul made his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences. Paul's father stood up, his face reddening. "Now see here, young lady. You can't just throw away a marriage like this. What about your vows?" "My vows?" I laughed bitterly. "What about Paul's vows? To love and cherish me, to be honest and faithful." Paul stepped forward, reaching for my hand. I jerked away. "Laura, please. I'll do anything. I'll sell everything, get counseling, whatever you want." For a moment, I wavered. The pain in his eyes was real, and part of me ached to comfort him. But then I remembered the months of lies, the betrayal, the way he'd gambled away our future. "It's too late, Paul," I said quietly. "The trust is gone. I can't build a life with someone I can't rely on." Paul's face crumpled. His mother burst into tears, while his father's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake," he growled. "Paul's a good man. He just lost his way for a bit." I stood up, my patience wearing thin. "With all due respect, Mr. Mendez, you don't know the half of it. Your son didn't just lose his way. He systematically drained our accounts, maxed out our credit cards, and lied to me for months. He put his own selfish desires above our marriage and our future." Paul's parents turned to him, shock and disappointment etched on their faces. "Is this true?" his mother whispered. Paul nodded, unable to meet their eyes. I didn't mean for it to go so far. I just wanted to fit in, to feel important." His father's face darkened. He grabbed Paul's arm, pulling him towards the door. "We're leaving. Now." As they reached the doorway, Paul's father turned back to me. "I'm sorry, Laura, we had no idea." He nodded once, a gesture of understanding and respect, before leading his son away. I sank into my chair, emotionally drained. The confrontation had been brutal, but I felt a strange sense of closure. I'd stood my ground, spoken my truth, and come out stronger. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Lunch later? I have news about the clinic expansion." I smiled, feeling a glimmer of excitement for the future. As I typed my reply, I realized that for the first time in months, I was looking forward to what lay ahead. The road wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face it head on. The intercom crackled again. "Dr. Mendez, your next client is ready." Taking a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders and stood up. It was time to get back to work, to continue building the life and career I'd fought so hard for. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I had the strength to face them. The weeks following Paul's confrontation at my clinic flew by in a whirlwind of activity. I threw myself into my work, channeling all my pain and anger into helping my patients and expanding the counseling center. The distraction was welcome, but exhaustion was catching up with me. One evening, as I was locking up the clinic, Sarah appeared at my side. "Laura, we need to talk," I sighed, recognizing the concern in her eyes. "I'm fine, Sarah. Really." She shook her head. "No, you're not. You're working yourself to the bone. When was the last time you took a day off?" I couldn't remember. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Sarah continued, "The clinic's thriving, but at what cost? You're burning out, Laura." Her words stung because I knew they were true. I'd been so focused on proving I could succeed without Paul that I'd neglected my own well-being. "You're right," I admitted. I don't know how to slow down. If I stop, I'll have to face everything that's happened." Sarah squeezed my hand. "That's exactly what you need to do. Face it, process it, and move on." The next day, I made a decision. I hired 2 new therapists to help with the workload and blocked out a week for myself. It was time to confront the emotional fallout I'd been avoiding. On my first day off, I woke up feeling lost. Without work to distract me, the weight of the past few months came crashing down. I found myself standing in front of the full-length mirror, really looking at myself for the first time in ages. The woman staring back at me looked tired, worn, but there was a strength in her eyes that I hadn't noticed before. I realized that, despite everything, I was still standing. I had survived. As the week progressed, I allowed myself to feel everything I'd been suppressing: the anger, the betrayal, the grief for the future I'd lost. But with each passing day, I also felt a growing sense of pride in how I'd handled the situation. On the 5th day of my break, I received an unexpected call from Paul's mother. "Laura," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I wanted to thank you." I was stunned. "Thank me for what?" "For being strong enough to walk away," she replied. "Paul, he's getting help now, seeing a therapist, working through his issues. Your actions forced him to face his problems." I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, a hint of vindication. "I'm glad he's getting help," I said softly. After hanging up, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt truly at peace. I had made the right decision, not just for myself, but for Paul too. The next morning, I woke up feeling refreshed and energized. I headed to the clinic, eager to implement some new ideas I'd had during my break. As I walked in, I was greeted by the sight of my team, my growing, thriving team, working together seamlessly. Sarah approached me, a wide smile on her face. "Welcome back, boss. How are you feeling?" I returned her smile, feeling a surge of gratitude for her friendship and support. "Better than I have in months. Thank you, Sarah, for everything." As I settled into my office, I noticed a stack of patient files on my desk. New referrals, a testament to our growing reputation. I picked up the first file, ready to dive in, when my phone buzzed with a text from Janet, my divorce attorney. "Final papers ready for signing. Paul's agreed to all terms. It's over." I stared at the message, a complex mix of emotions washing over me. It was over. Really, truly over. The realization hit me hard, bringing with it a sense of finality I hadn't expected. For a moment, I felt overwhelmed. But then I looked around my office, at the degrees on the wall, the photos of happy patients, the evidence of the life I'd built for myself. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and picked up my pen. It was time to close this chapter and start writing the next one. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I had the strength to face them. After all, I was Dr. Laura Mendez, survivor, therapist, and architect of my own destiny. With a steady hand, I signed the papers, ready to embrace my new beginning. The day had finally arrived. I stood outside the courthouse, my heart pounding as I clutched the folder containing the final divorce papers. Sarah squeezed my hand reassuringly. "You've got this, Laura?" she whispered. I nodded, taking a deep breath before pushing open the heavy doors. The courtroom was nearly empty, save for Janet, my attorney, and Paul, sitting alone at the defendant's table. Our eyes met briefly, and I was struck by how different he looked. Humbled, almost defeated. As the judge entered, I straightened my spine, ready to face this final hurdle. The proceedings moved quickly, a blur of legal jargon and formalities. Then, suddenly, it was time for the final statements. "Dr. Mendez," the judge addressed me, "do you have anything you'd like to say before we conclude?" I stood, my voice steady as I spoke. "Your Honor, I came into this marriage with hope and trust. I'm leaving it with wisdom and strength. While I regret the circumstances that brought us here, I don't regret the decision to end this chapter of my life." I turned to Paul, meeting his gaze directly. "I hope you find peace and purpose, Paul. But I need to find those things for myself now." Paul nodded, a mix of emotions playing across his face. When it was his turn to speak, he surprised me. "I'm sorry, Laura," he said, his voice cracking, "for everything. You deserved better, and I hope you find happiness." With those words, it was done. The judge's gavel fell, declaring our marriage officially dissolved. As we left the courtroom, Paul's parents approached me. "Laura," his mother began, "we want you to know how sorry we are for everything that happened. We've restricted Paul's access to finances, and he's found a job. He's working hard to make amends." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "Thank you. I'm glad he's getting his life back on track." As they walked away, I turned to Sarah and Janet, a smile breaking across my face. "It's over. It's really over." We celebrated that night, a small gathering of friends at my new apartment. As I looked around at the faces of those who had supported me through this ordeal, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The next morning, I woke early, energized despite the late night. I had a full day of sessions at the clinic, but for the first time in months, I felt truly excited about the work ahead. As I walked into the clinic, I was greeted by the sight of my expanded team, the new therapists I'd hired, the receptionist who'd stood by me through it all, and Sarah, my rock. "Good morning, Dr. Mendez," they chorused, and I felt a surge of pride. This was what I had built, what I had fought for. My first patient of the day was a woman going through a difficult divorce. As she poured out her fears and doubts, I found myself drawing on my own experiences, offering not just professional advice, but genuine empathy and understanding. "You're stronger than you know," I told her, the words resonating deeply within me. "This is just one chapter of your story. The next one is yours to write." As she left, looking more hopeful than when she'd arrived, I realized something profound. My own painful journey had made me a better therapist, a more compassionate person. I had turned my pain into purpose. That evening, as I locked up the clinic, I paused to look at the plaque on the door. Dr. Laura Mendez, clinical psychologist. It was the same name I'd always had, but I felt like a different woman now. Stronger, wiser, more self-assured. I walked home, enjoying the warm evening air and the sense of possibility that seemed to stretch out before me. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Dinner tomorrow? New restaurant in town." I smiled, typing back a quick, "Absolutely." Before I could put my phone away, another message came through, this one from Paul's mother. "Laura, I hope this isn't overstepping, but I wanted you to know that Paul's doing well in therapy. He often speaks of how your strength inspired him to get help. Thank you for being the catalyst for positive change in his life, even if it meant ending your marriage. I hope you're finding happiness in your new chapter." I read the message twice, a complex mix of emotions washing over me. There was a twinge of sadness for what might have been, but it was overshadowed by a sense of peace and closure. As I reached my apartment, I paused on the threshold, looking back at the city skyline. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. It struck me as a fitting metaphor. One chapter of my life was ending, but a new, potentially more beautiful one was just beginning. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. Tomorrow was a new day, full of possibilities, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms. The Laura who had started this journey was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth, her strength, and her potential. As I settled in for the evening, I felt a sense of excitement for what the future held. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I had the strength to face them. After all, I was Dr. Laura Mendez, survivor, healer, and author of my own destiny.